Howard, you and I spoke last year about this case, and there have been certainly a lot of developments between now and then, but this has really been a story that's gripped the entire nation, and you've been covering it from the start. Before dawn on November 13th, 2022, four University of Idaho students, Kaylee Gonzalez, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally murdered at an off-campus home. And over a month after these murders, Bryan Kohberger, who was studying for his PhD in criminology at the nearby Washington State University, was charged. And this case was all set to go to trial in August, but in a shocking twist that surprised mostly everyone, he ended up pleading guilty earlier this month. And we're going to talk about the plea, but as someone who went to Moscow, who's someone who is familiar with this case, you've investigated this for years. I'm curious, A, what drew you to this story? Why did you begin reporting on it? And B, what are some of your takeaways here?
I began looking into this case on Thanksgiving nearly 3 years ago. We were sitting around the table and the talk turned to this perplexing case in Idaho. Horrific. 4 students were killed. There was no clues really at this point. There was no suspect and there was no motive. And I began to talk with my editor the next day and I said, well, I've made a career looking into large mysteries. Why not delve into this one? And he agreed, and I was on the plane the next day. And what I found was to begin with, an interesting town. Moscow, and the locals say you pronounce it Moscow rather than Moscow. They want the name, they say, to rhyme with Costco. That was what they insisted. It's a town that's on one level a university town, a very liberal university town. It's rated as the largest party school in the state, and yet the main populace of the rest of the town is a fundamentalist Christian church. So there's a great deal of tension, but it's a very pretty place, surrounded by hills, rolling land, very pretty, and yet also has a frontier spirit. So I started knocking on doors and trying to put the pieces together. And it was a real puzzle because there were no suspects. The task force was on the case for 7 weeks before they had any real clue. And this one clue allowed them to unravel the case. This clue was that on the night when the murders occurred, the murderer left a knife sheath in the bed of one of the victims. And on that knife sheath, on the button snap of the knife sheath, there was a bit of touched DNA.
And so then here we are today. That knife sheath was a huge piece of evidence because it ultimately was able to connect the investigators to Bryan Kohberger via his father's DNA. So do you think without that knife sheath, if Bryan Kohberger did not leave that behind, we would be sitting here today, he would have pled guilty, he would have even been found or connected to this case at all?
I think, and in my opinion, this is sheer speculation, if Bryan Kohberger knife sheath had not been found, if that DNA had not been on the knife sheath, there was no blood traces from Kohberger anywhere in the house. There was nothing really to connect him at that time. He would still be on the loose today. He would have bought another knife sheath on Amazon. We saw that he was hunting for a new one. The murder weapon has never been found. He wanted a new knife. And I believe he would have killed again. I think he would have had the satisfaction of this one killing, and it would have encouraged him to go out there and try to do it again. All the evidence that the prosecution had really came in the aftermath of this DNA on the knife sheath being indicated. And it was, in many ways, somewhat circumstantial. They had, for example, videos of a white car circling the area 4 different times on the night when the killing occurred. But in all those videos, there's not one shot of the license plate, and there's not one clear photograph of anyone behind the wheel. And there are a lot of white cars in Idaho. And they had cell phone triangulation that put Kohberger's phone 23 times, the prosecution said, in the vicinity of the murder house, within 100 meters of the murder house in the months before the murders. Well, 100 meters in a town like Moscow, there are a lot of people who live around that area. It's a campus community. And so that really isn't incriminating. They never found the murder weapon. They never found any blood splatters in his apartment, no trail of blood leaving from the murder scene. So this was in many ways a perfect crime except for the one thing, is leaving the knife sheath behind.